Hi, I'm Preston Williams, and welcome to another edition of Jazz Talk. Today on our show, we have with us one of the most gifted jazz musicians on the scene today. This gentleman has been around for over 40 years and has worked with many greats, from Hank Jones to McCoy Tyner, so many. Elvin Jones, Esperanza Spalding, Dave Holland. He is a Grammy award-winning saxophonist, composer, and educator. Please welcome to Jazz Talk, Mr. Joe Lovano. How are you?
Fantastic. Thanks for
Great,
inviting
great.
me. And yeah, it's a pleasure, man.
Oh man, it definitely is. Well, Joe, I was just going to ask, you've been on the scene, man, for a long time. You've worked with so many great artists. I understand that you're from Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And I'm interested in knowing about your family life because you come from a family of saxophone players, and your father, known as Tony Big T, was very influential in sort of getting you started, man. Tell us about your family and how you got involved in jazz.
oh, great. I would say my dad was one of the leading tenor players around Cleveland in his day.
Hmm.
He was born in 1925 and was in that generation with Coltrane and Gene Ammons and Charlie Parker and everyone. When he came home from the service, um, he was really on the scene, the jazz scene in the mid late 40s in Cleveland,
Mm.
and heard Charlie Parker, heard Lester Young, played in jam sessions with Gene Ammons and John Coltrane,
Mm.
came to Cleveland playing alto in a blues band, the Guy Cross band. And my dad met Coltrane and played in some sessions with him when he was on alto. This was before, probably earliest period when he was playing in Dizzy's big band, like early 50s,
Early 50s, yeah.
before the Miles Davis period.
Exactly.
But anyway, my dad had he was on a scene with Tad Dameron, also was from
Mm.
Cleveland, and
Mm.
other musicians that emerged through the years. Benny Bailey, great trumpet player. Bill Hardman, also trumpet, who played with Art Blakey, with Johnny Griffin was in the band.
Yeah.
Um, Freddie Webster was from Cleveland, who was
That's
another
Miles
trumpet.
Davis's man there.
Yeah, who was a trumpet player that Dizzy and everybody really admired and was on the scene with them,
Yeah.
through the Tad Dameron connections. And then Albert Eiler was from Cleveland, and Frank Wright, and other players, Bobby Few, who we just lost like over this last week, actually. He was a part of Albert Eiler's band and moved to Paris in the 60s and lived in Paris his whole life. Bobby Few was a very influential pianist on the scene and a legendary figure for me, because when he was really young, he played some gigs with my dad, which I later
Wow.
found out when I was uh, hanging out with him in Paris. He was a part of the Steve Lacy band also for 20 years.
Mm.
Um, but anyway, those early roots, my dad's roots, right, they're a part of my roots. And as a teenager, growing up in the 60s, my dad's record collection and hearing him practice and play the music that he was playing, and he was coming out of the Charlie Parker songbook,
Mm.
but Coleman Hawkins and Illinois Jacquet,
Ben Webster and those guys. Yeah.
Ben Webster and Lester Young. I mean, my dad heard them in the room. He felt their vibrations and
Yeah.
feelings, and it came through his horn in his sound.
Yeah.
And growing up hearing him practice and play and having his enthusiastic passion for the music and the players, the community he lived in was the jazz community in
Mm.
Cleveland, which is a really beautiful multicultural scene, and that generations too, growing up with that And then, you know, having instruments and developing um, in an organic way on my instrument, you know, trying to learn the tunes I was hearing him play. And then,
Well, you started playing about what, 5 or 6 years old on alto, didn't you? You started on alto.
well, yeah, you know, as a kid, I had an alto. I started 5 and 6. I started to learn, you know, put the reed on and just play through the neck and mouthpiece without even the horn,
Yeah.
just to get a sound, you know, get a tone. Uh, and then, of course, then studying and learning the mechanics of the instrument, you know. Um, I got my first tenor, I think, going into 7th grade, like
Mhm.
11, 12 years old.
Yeah.
But those years before that, I was in the elementary school orchestra and playing alto and then C melody. And then I got my first tenor,
Yeah.
and that became my main focus, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, but from his record collections and the tunes I was hearing him play, and here going to rehearsals, he would bring me to rehearsals.
I was about to ask you that. Was he taking you to gigs, so you could just sit back and watch your dad,
Yeah,
play?
I mean, not at first. It wasn't gigs until I was a teenager and started to drive.
Right.
But prior to that, there would be rehearsals at our house.
Mm.
So I was meeting cats that he was playing with and sitting there and listening to them put some tunes together, you know. There was this cat, Emil Boyd. I don't know if you know his name.
Name sounds
He wrote the
familiar.
tune called "I Love Music" that Ahmad Jamal recorded on his amazing session, the record "Awakening,"
Awakening. Yeah.
and it's a solo piano piece of Emil's tune "I Love Music," which I've recorded a few times through the years now, and many people have. Clark Terry and Betty Carter, and but Ahmad Jamal's version was like really the famous version, and it put Emil on the map. Let's say.
Mm.
He was from Cleveland and a disciple of Tad Damron, but also like a real modernist, you know. I mean,
Mhm.
he wrote compositions that I have a whole book of his things, and I've recorded a few of his tunes, you know.
Yeah.
One is on my recording live at the Village Vanguard, Quartets with
I
Tom
was about to
Harrell.
talk about that, man. That's that you were, downbeat. I think that was like Jazz Album of the Year in 1994, if I'm not mistaken.
I think, well, that's around the time we
Yeah.
did it, and at the time, I had my working band was with Tom Harrell, Anthony Cox, and Billy Hart,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had another quartet that was also doing a lot of things with Mulgrew Miller and Christian McBride and Lewis Nash.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
that period established these two different quartet formats for me. You know, one without piano and trumpet, and then one with just trumpet, you know.
Now, by the time you got into your late teens, Joe, were you playing in local bands in that area?
Well, you know, I was developing as an improviser, right?
Okay.
Studying the music and growing up in the era I did, and in Cleveland, you know, Motown. I
Mm-hmm.
was in a bunch of bands with folks my generation, but then because I was developing as a soloist, I was starting to get calls to play gigs with folks,
Wow.
you know, and having the embrace of the different musicians that my dad was playing with,
Mm-hmm.
right? Different organ players, a real organ scene. The 60s was a real amazing period. I think that Lou Donaldson, Jimmy Smith, Shirley Scott, James Moody came, you know, with an organ group with Eddie Jefferson, you know. There was a lot of clubs that didn't have pianos, that a lot of the organ groups, they could just pull up right in front with the trailer, unload the organ into the club, and turn a corner tavern into a venue, you
Yeah.
know. And I caught that as a teenager,
That's beautiful.
and that's what led me to my first really gigs that made an impact with Dr. Lonnie Smith.
Yeah, I wanted to
and
go.
brother Jack McDuff,
Right.
like
And
19.
I wanted to go back a little bit. I'm glad you brought those names up. I wanted to talk about your time you went to Berkeley College of Music, man. And I
Right.
understand that you studied with Gary Burton.
Well, I studied with Gary Burton. I was placed in his one of his ensembles,
Yeah.
and also with Andy McGee on tenor,
Yes.
and also Joe Viola saxophone, and Nick Cayaza on flute, and John Laporta, who was one of the founders of Berkeley,
Yeah.
who was a pioneer and played with the Woody Herman band in the 40s, you know, and was also a very free improviser and created all kinds of beautiful sounds on the clarinet and tenor, you know.
Yeah.
Studying with John Laporta was really great. But prior to going to Berkeley, you know, I mean, I graduated high school in 1971.
Hmm.
So I went to Berkeley that year, you know. Prior to that, I was like on the scene in Cleveland playing in all kind of different settings and really into the repertoire, the jazz repertoire, you know, the songbooks of Charlie Parker and Diz, you know, Thelonious Monk's music and some original pieces of music by Emile Boyd, who I mentioned earlier, you know. When I got my driver's license and I was able to go to some clubs and some matinee concerts, I had a chance to really be in a room with Sonny Stitt, okay, uh, playing alto and tenor, and he had an organ trio also, you know. Then James Moody came,
Mm.
and with Eddie Jefferson and Roy Brooks on drums, you know. Uh, Hip organ player Billy Pierce, who I never really heard too much about after that, but Moody playing flute and alto and tenor, and with Eddie Jefferson singing solos like Miles solos and Coleman Hawkins solos and solos I knew from record. All of a sudden, I'm in the room and he's expressing himself with words through these famous solos. That was incredible, man. And
It's incredible
I
that you
went to
have.
a matinee with a friend of mine, Ron Smith, who's a vibes player.
Uh-huh.
We were in a matinee and the club is packed, and we're sitting at a table. Moody plays their set, and he immediately walks to our table when they take a break, sits down and says, "Oh, so you guys are musicians?" You know, we're like 15 and 16 years old, you know.
Right.
And I always told Moody that story, how much that meant, man, for him to come over and say hello.
Yeah.
You know, we're the only white cats in the club, you know. We're like these kids, you know. But my dad had been playing in this club,
Hmm.
right? He would play alternate weeks when they didn't have a star band.
Hmm.
So people knew me. I was able to get in, even though we were kind of underage, but we would go to the matinee, Sunday, Saturday matinees. And that I went and got a flute the next day, man, that week after hearing Moody. And then I heard Rasan
Oh
also,
man.
right at that time, you know. And so I started to play more doubles, you know. I started to study the flute and get more into the clarinet, you know, from that time. So that, you know, that was an amazing period. And then going to Berkeley and having a chance to to be there
Yeah.
with some great folks, my generation, Billy Pierce
Yeah.
on tenor,
Yeah.
saxophone. We were there at the same time. George Garzone, another saxophonist, who's really both of those cats like uh, make a serious impact on the scene. You know,
Yeah.
Billy Pierce ended up being the head of the saxophone woodwind department from the mid 70s on. When I moved to New York in the mid 70s, he got the gig at teaching, and so did Garzone. And then Billy rose and was the head of the woodwind department, and just till last year when he kind of retired from that spot.
Yeah. He went on to play with the great Tony Williams too. In
Oh
that.
yeah, Tony Williams and Art Blakey's band, all
Yeah.
kinds of things, you know. Anyway, that crowd at Berkeley was with John Schofield was there, Bill
Yeah.
Frisell was there,
Wow.
Joey Barron, Kenny Werner,
Mm.
all kinds of folks. Billy Drew's another beautiful improviser who we play a lot together. Steve Slagle, who's in my nonet on alto. That period, and just like Berklee has been through the years, each period, each generation of players that come through Berklee have emerged on the scene. When Roy Hargrove went, his crowd, Branford Marsalis and Tane, the crowd that was there with those guys, I mean, so like, and then everybody moves to New York. So there's this amazing community of folks with all these deep relationships,
Yeah. I talked with, I had Greg Osby on, and he was talking about that period that you were just saying with all those guys at that time. Cindy Blackman Santana.
Exactly.
Terry Lynn Carrington eventually went there. Yeah. Everyone.
Yeah. The period that when Osby was there, that was another period. My period was with Schofield and Mike Stern.
Right.
Those cats, and, as you develop through the years, these relationships become so important because you develop around your peoples, and I feel so fortunate to have been on the scene with my dad's peoples before I went to Boston, so I went there with a repertoire and a real understanding about what it is to be in the jazz community, and also what it is to be in the music.
Yeah, exactly.
And reflecting on that now, especially during this whole last year, like not touring, you're reflecting a lot and soul searching and really realizing a lot of things about how you developed. There was always a purpose for me to play for people and to play with others, and realizing that multi-generational aspect about the music is so important, man. And it's like having that embrace, having the embrace of the elders, the masters that you consider your mentors as you develop.
Yeah.
Even with cats that aren't like big names,
Yeah.
but people that are mentors, like the saxophone players, the organ players, the drummers. There was a drummer my dad played with a lot. His name was Lawrence Jacktown Jackson. Okay. Jacktown came from Detroit. He came up with Hank Jones, right? He was like that generation, but he moved to Cleveland in the early 50s. Anyway, he was on the scene, and man, he was the first really great drummer I played with. I'm like 16, 17 years old or whatever. He's playing in a trio with my dad, with his other great organ player, Eddie Backus, a blind organ player who played with Rahsaan.
Yeah.
He came to Cleveland. Rahsaan was from Columbus. So he was around Cleveland a lot. And my dad knew Rahsaan through the years, But anyway, Eddie, who's still with us today, man, and is so beautiful, right? Playing with him and Jacktown together. I'm a kid, but having their embrace, and then realizing later who these cats were and, how they came up, and, So Jacktown, just a little story about him. He was friendly with Coltrane and everyone, right? From Detroit, and, like you speak with Barry Harris and cats today, they'll talk about Jacktown, Anyway, he was one of those legendary drummers. So he goes to hear the Coltrane Quartet. This is around 1965 or so, one of the last times they played, right, in Cleveland. And he goes to hear them, says hello. Elvin doesn't show up for the first set. He's not there when they're time to hit. So Coltrane invites Jacktown to play. It's with McCoy and Jimmy Garrison, right? And just so happens a writer from Downbeat is there to do a Caught in the Act, the Coltrane Quartet. Right. Jacktown plays the set. So like in the review and the thing they write, you know, local legend Lawrence Jacktown Jackson plays with the Coltrane. It put Jacktown in that light, that
Yeah.
spotlight,
Yeah.
you know, at that time in the mid 60s, man, which was like that was a powerful, beautiful thing, you know, which I didn't realize that till later. And then I saw it in Downbeat. In an old downbeat. My dad also was a barber, right? He had, you know, because he raised a family. He didn't have the ambitions to go to New York and do all this crazy stuff that we do, you know. My dad's barber shop was like, he had a B3 organ in there for
In the
rehearsals
barbershop?
at the barbershop
Oh,
for
wow.
rehearsals, you know. And he also had like all downbeat magazines and a sound system, listening to cassettes and music all the time, you know.
He's cutting hair to
So
some jazz.
yeah, and he's cutting and like, you know, and then of course McCoy Tyner, his mom was a
Beautician.
beautician.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where he had his piano. And he could play sessions in her beauty shop after she closed in Philadelphia. So McCoy had a situation too where he had a space as a teenager where he could have jam sessions, not only a room for him to practice and develop his way of playing, but you know, to have a community scene,
Right.
you know. And Lee Morgan and all those cats are McCoy's generation, you
Right.
know, born in like late 30s, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and all those cats. So Coltrane, when he would go to Philly, or he lived in Philly, but after he was already in New York playing with Miles and everyone, he would go to Philly a lot. And that whole community, man, all those cats, Rashid Ali, Jimmy Garrison, Reggie Workman,
Oh, yeah.
McCoy, you
Jimmy
know,
Heath was from there too. Yeah.
well, Jimmy Heath and Benny Golson, you know, of course, you know, we know but that younger crowd that all
Right.
ended up playing with Coltrane.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that community, you know, amazing, man.
It's amazing.
Anyway, I kind of had you know, I had some of that as a teenager in
I
Cleveland.
think that's beautiful, man. I'm glad you shared that. You just made me think of something when you brought up McCoy. He used to say that sometimes Bud Powell would come by and just stop and listen and look in there and see what was going on. I'm like, Bud Powell? Wow.
Mhm.
That's
Oh yeah.
amazing.
Oh, and
But
he spoke about that all the time, man. I
yeah.
started to play with McCoy in 1999,
Mm-hmm.
and I played with him really through from then till he passed, you know.
Which was incredible. You know, that was one of the things I was going to ask you about also. I mean, playing with, you know, him and Elvin Jones. I mean, my goodness. I mean, that would be incredible for anyone to play with those guys. And McCoy's considered, you know, the most influential pianist of the last 60 years. But what was it like working with those guys? I'm like, you're listening to like a Love Supreme and all those other recordings. You're like, man, I'm playing with McCoy Tyner. You know,
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, did it hit you like that, Joe?
Well, you know, I mean, I grew up listening to McCoy and Elvin on all these amazing recordings, and not only with Coltrane, with everybody on the scene. You know, Freddie Hubbard,
Yeah.
Joe Henderson, and Wayne Shorter. You know, I mean, studying and trying to have an understanding from the recordings is one thing, but then when you actually are in the room with them, with their vibrations and sounds, you know, uh, and then trying to always, for me, it was always, it's why I moved to New York, you know, to be on the scene, to try to sit in and, you know, not even thinking about like making a contribution, just to be there and to have their embrace, right? And you never know, you know, you're in their audience. You know, I'm speaking of the masters, you know, you're in the audience. Then at a certain point, they're in your audience. And when that happens, something all of a sudden, man, that sent me into the woodshed like a monster, which I'm still in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
It
of that.
reminds me of Sonny Rollins, you know, his sabbaticals and just going to that bridge, man, you know?
Definitely, you know, you have ideas, you work them out, and you sometimes you do that in isolation, and then you emerge from it. Sometimes you do it within groups of folks, you know. I mean, when I got called to play with McCoy the first time, it was at Yoshi's in Oakland, right, in
Famous club.
1999. And the group was Bobby Hutchison and Sharnette Moffett and Billy Higgins.
Wow.
So to play with Billy Higgins and McCoy together and Bobby, and Sharnette had been in McCoy's band at the time, right? And I got called to make this date, and man, it was like having those cats embrace was something. But I had played with Billy Higgins before, you know, but I had never played with McCoy and Bobby. And McCoy comes to the first rehearsal, man, no music, nothing. Sits down, starts playing. So he expects everybody to know what's happening, you know. Bobby, they were playing some of his compositions. He had kind of a book of stuff because him and McCoy, you know, came up together, and they did lots of so much amazing music together with Joe Henderson and others, you know. Bobby had a book, so he was showing me some things, and that just snowballed into playing a bunch of times with Bobby and McCoy together with Billy until Billy passed, right? But then with Al Foster and other people. And then in 2006, we recorded live at Yoshi's with Christian McBride and Jeff Tain Watts, the McCoy Tyner Quartet. And it was funny, that same year in 2006, I was playing with Hank Jones during that period also.
Another great.
Oh, man. I mean, Hank and McCoy together.
Yeah.
When McCoy was around Hank, he was like I would be around George Coleman or somebody.
Really?
Oh, yeah. No. Hank Jones was like one of the leading inspirations for generations of players.
Yeah, because he's in that generation like before McCoy, like mid 40s and 50s.
Oh yeah, Hank was born 1918.
Yeah,
Hank was.
He was wasn't he?
McCoy was born in. McCoy was born in 38.
38, exactly.
Yeah. So Hank was when Hank came to New York in the early 40s. I mean, he took Monk's spot with Coleman Hawkins. 1944. So.
Yeah.
So anyway, Hank was like the most amazing, incredible people, man, persons, and so generous and so elegant, and in his playing and in his demeanor, but just as a searching improviser. I mean, he played free.
Yeah.
Within whatever music he was focusing on, you know. And that same year in 2006, I put out a recording playing duets with Hank live at Dizzy's Jazz at Lincoln Center.
Right.
So that same year, I recorded with McCoy and Hank, and it was like, wow.
That's any saxophonist.
Never thought something like that would go down, you know.
That's amazing.
Because Hank, for me too, like the one Charlie Parker quartet recording where they play The Song Is You, that was with Hank and Max Roach, Curly Russell.
Yeah.
That record was part of my dad's collection, you know, the Verve recordings of Charlie Parker. And then another record that Hank was on that I grew up listening to was Bags and Train.
Yeah.
Milt Jackson.
Right, Milt Jackson.
And Hank on that record, man, he was leading folks around, man, in his harmonic rhythm and the way he voiced things, you know. Yeah, man. No.
That's beautiful, man. I'm loving this. I'm loving this. I was going to just go back a little bit after Berkeley. You know, we talk about Jack McDuff and Lonnie Smith, man. What was it like working with those guys, you know, right out of Berkeley? Because, you know, you just came out hitting, you know, working with these people. Then you end up working with the Woody Herman Orchestra for like 3 years. That was fantastic.
That was amazing. I was 23 when I joined Woody's band, you know.
Yeah.
But like right around the time at Berkeley, okay, 71 and 2, I was in Boston. right around during that period, there was a club that opened in Cleveland called the Smiling Dog Saloon.
Mhm.
Okay. Somewhere around 1971 or something, it opened, and it lasted until maybe 76. This club, it used to be an old bowling alley. Okay. So it was a big room,
Mhm.
right? There was a bar in the front that originally was like kind of a Hell's Angels kind of a funny club, a bar in the front. And then this guy took over the place who was friendly with all those people. So the front bar was a bizarre scene. But
Yeah.
then the back room was maybe a 10-lane bowling alley that he converted into a sound stage. Okay. Weather Report played one of their first gigs there.
Mm.
And it put the place on the map. So then all of a sudden, Chick Corea played there, McCoy played, Chick's group Return to Forever, the Headhunters with,
Herbie Hancock. Yeah.
Herbie's band, all the bands that were really bands, Mahavishnu, all these groups played at the Smiling Dog Saloon. So I went back to Cleveland and I was in some groups that played opposite some of these star groups. Cannonball Adderley played, Stan Getz, Pharoah Sanders, Yusef Lateef, and some of them like played with some local cats in the rhythm section too,
Yeah.
Some of my cats in my generation got gigs. Great drummer, Greg Bandy, played with Gary Bartz and done a lot of stuff. Pharoah Sanders. Bandy got some gigs there. Another drummer, Marty Barker, he copped a gig with Yusef Lateef.
Mhm.
So all of a sudden, some of us were on, in the audience for those cats, but they were all of a sudden in our audience a little bit. I mean, I sat in with Sonny Stitt and Milt Jackson. Now I'm like 20 years old or something, maybe
Incredible.
21. And I'm playing opposite them, and they're playing with a local rhythm section. So Sonny Stitt, of course, was one of my idols, as a kid, and I brought my dad down there to hear Stitt, and I'm in a quartet opening for them. Anyway, one night, Sonny Stitt, we're in the dressing room, and Baggs is there, and Stitt, he looks at me, he goes, you want to sit in? You want to play with me? He asked me if I wanted to sit in, right? I'm like nervous, And he's a teacher, Stitt. He says, how many C's can you hit on that horn? I had 3 C's, and he picked up his horn and he hit this high C, beep. He says, there's another one in there. But he didn't show me how to play it. He just pointed out,
Right.
right? He asked me how many holes were on my horn. And I'm starting to count, like. Anyway, he asked me if I wanted to sit in, and Milt Jackson standing there, and I'll never forget, man. Milt like immediately goes like, and but anyway, I ended up coming up, and we played on Green Dolphin Street. And while I'm playing, Sonny Stitt comes in my ear and he says, "Play another one," which was a moment was like, "Oh wow, okay." Anyway, I had a little embrace from Sonny Stitt at a young age,
And he probably heard something like, "Yeah, keep playing, kid, keep playing."
Yeah, he wanted to see where I would take the next chorus, right?
Beautiful.
And, anyway, then years later, okay, that was maybe 1973.
Wow.
Like that.
Yeah.
73, 74. Anyway, years later, like 1980 now, I get the gig with the Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra.
Right.
Playing Thad Jones's music. And Monday nights at the Village Vanguard. So I had that gig from 1980 till 91 or something when Mel passed, right? Anyway, one night Baggs comes and he's standing by the telephone and we played, I didn't know he was there. Anyway, we played Thad's chart on, called Cherry Juice. It's an amazing piece of music, which I had a feature solo on. So I play on this tune. we take a break, and I walk by and I see Milt Jackson standing by the telephone as you're on your way to the kitchen at the Vanguard, right? And I look at him and say hello, and he looks at me, he goes, "Yeah, Lovano, I hear you." He remembered me sitting in Cleveland as this young cat. And then like 7, 8 years later, he's hearing me play with Thad Jones and Mel Lewis band, you know? And that was a beautiful moment, man. And then I got friendly with Bags through the years after that. I played with Jim Hall, who also was from Cleveland.
Right.
I was in a quartet with Jim and George Mraz and Louis Nash, a group we had called the Grand Slam. And we played the Blue Note, and Bags came to hear us also. And that was amazing to have him in the room, man. Yeah, Milt Jackson, man. He was like, yeah. You know, so you know, that period, that Smiling Dog scene opened a lot of doors for a lot of things to happen. I sat in with Elvin there too. Elvin came with a quartet with Steve Grossman on saxophone and Roland Prince on guitar, okay, which Dave Liebman had been in the band right before that. He had a 2 saxophone quartet. But when Dave split to form his own group, Roland Prince came, beautiful guitar player from Antigua, right, from the Caribbean. Anyway, I was in a group playing opposite Elvin and got friendly with him, and I asked him if I could sit in and play. And I sat in one night, and I ended up playing like 3, 4 different nights throughout the week, like the last couple tunes of the evening, you know. And that was 1974 or 5. Okay, just before I moved to New York.
Yeah.
So then I had an open invitation, man, from that time to come and play with Elvin and sit in. I sat in with him a number of times. And then early 80s, he called me to play a couple gigs, right? Some things Pat LaBarbera couldn't do, I subbed for Pat. And then did a tour with Elvin, and he called his band the Jazz Machine.
Yeah, I remember that.
1987, I did a 9-week European tour with Elvin. First 2 weeks at Ronnie Scott's in London. I flew to London and joined the band, and it was amazing to play 2 weeks in one venue with Elvin. And then we went on the road for another 6 weeks doing one-nighters and different things around Europe, you know. 10 years after that, 1997 or so, he played on my recording Trio Fascination.
Man, listen, let me tell you something. I wanted to tell you something about that recording. I mean, I love all your Blue Note stuff. That is a personal favorite of mine, Joe. Wow. I love that recording, and I still play it, you know, quite a bit. But
thank you, man. Arriving to that moment was a trip, man. But it didn't just happen. That's why I wanted to kind of lay that down.
Yeah.
I sat in with Elvin the first time, like it's 1975. That recording was 97.
Yeah.
You know, but the tour I did with him too was in 87. So, you know, things happen in the jazz community and world when you have the embrace and you're in on the scene developing within the music, you know. And I feel so fortunate to have had such an amazing, crazy career that brought me to a lot of places like that. But things just don't happen just like that.
Exactly.
You like, you know, you get yourself together. Like long before I sat in with Elvin, man, I was studying and hearing all the records that he was on, you know, and that was a focus for me. I want to play with this cat, man. You know, how do I get that together? You know, you have to know the language and feel it and share the space, not to just play at the same time with somebody, but to play within what's happening. You know, that's what I really learned from my dad too, man.
Amazing.
Like, you know, he told me early on, he says, you're going to be playing with some drummers. You got to know what's happening. So I had some drums, you know, you're going to play with piano players, you know, you have to know what's going on in harmony and all those things, you know, voicings. And just those were part of my lessons, was not only just playing the saxophone, was studying the music.
Yeah.
And the musicians on the different instruments, you know?
Yeah.
So that's why I never was really a crazy transcriber of solos to play what other people played.
Right.
As much as trying to learn the tunes and trying to learn how they were playing and what was really happening. Why did Miles play like that when Tony Williams played like that? You know, to listen and to react and to be involved with what each other's doing, you know. I started to put that connection together early on, and it really is a deep foundation for me about what improvising really is about, the art of improvising.
The art of improvising. You know, Joe, I wanted to ask you about that because you've been in several quartets and trios, but I like that saxophone summit, that group you had with Dave Friedman, Michael Brecker, and of course Robbie. After I guess Michael passed away, you had Robbie Coltrane. Man, that was awesome.
And now Greg Osby's been playing with us.
Greg Osby too?
Recently, yeah.
Okay.
Like the last part of that group has been with Osby, you know. Well, you know, that just came together from that started with something Liedman wanted to do. And that was around 1999 or something, right around that time. And of course, like you know, Mike and Dave were really for me, you know, some of the most expressive saxophone players.
Oh yeah.
You know, in my generation and in New York, you know, Mike was just a phenomenal player, man, who could play in so many settings and had this energy. And everybody was, in my generation, everybody was a Mike Brecker trying to be, there was a lot of clones, a lot of Mike Brecker clones out there, right? I wasn't like a Mike Brecker clone. We were on the scene together, and I loved Mike's playing, but I had some other roots.
Right.
I had my own roots, where I was coming from, you know, and to play toe to toe with him and Dave in that group was amazing, man. Because it was like with you know, Cecil McBee on bass, and Phil Markowitz piano, Billy Hart, Rufus Reed played with us also at the beginning of the band. And it was almost like 3 quartets within the sextet. Mike played, it was like his quartet. When Liebs played, it was Liebs' quartet in his way of playing. When I played, it was my quartet. And then we would come together in different combinations. That band had a lot of personality.
Yeah.
You know?
That was a great band, man.
And it was so fun to go on tour with and to develop ways of playing together on some incredible music, man. Liebman really brought in the later period Coltrane tunes, compositions from Meditations and pieces of music that nobody was really touching, you know?
Yeah.
But playing them in a sextet with 3 tenors opened the door to really play and with some interpretations and things. And on some of those original pieces, Coltrane had larger groups too, with Pharoah Sanders,
right,
Archie Shepp,
yeah,
you know, and double drummers with Elvin and Rashid, you know.
Yeah, Rashid Ali, yeah.
So, you know, anyway, playing with Jack McDuff to just touch that.
Right.
Smiling Dog again comes in because McDuff at the time, 1975, he was traveling with 2 tenors, guitar, organ, and drums. Right?
Okay.
And he had this tenor player, David Young, who was a great player from Indianapolis, who came up with Freddie Hubbard and James Spaulding and played with George Russell in the early 60s.
Mm.
He's on some recordings with George Russell and did a couple of solo recordings of his own also. Anyway, Dave Young was the star of the band, and this was an amazing saxophone player, man, a beautiful voice and way of playing. But MacDuff wanted to have a four saxophone. He wanted a saxophone section, okay, during this period.
Right.
So every town they would go, they would hire an alto player and a baritone player, local cats, wherever they played. And MacDuff had this little book for a saxophone section. So they come to Cleveland, and somehow I get the call to if I wanted to play the baritone chair.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the group opposite them also. I was playing with another quartet opposite them on tenor. I had a baritone, and I never really played it on a gig. Okay, I was playing it at home, and so they come. The word gets out, he's looking for a baritone player. So my name comes up. I say, oh, yeah, okay. So I take the gig, and Willie Smith gets called to play alto. Now, this cat, Willie Face Smith. Okay. Now, Face was my dad's partner, one of his peoples. Face played with Lionel Hampton in the early days. He was on the Motown. He was a staff writer for Motown. He wrote a lot of arrangements for the Supremes and all those groups. On the record, they don't give credit to anybody that wrote those arrangements. But anyway, Face wrote a lot of that stuff. He wrote the arrangement that when the Supremes were on the Ed Sullivan Show, they did a medley of their hits, 4 or 5 tunes. Face wrote that arrangement.
No.
Anyway, that all came out when he passed later. Anyway, Face was Tad Dameron's copyist also in the early days. So he was a writer, man. And he ended up writing the arrangements for my 52nd Street Themes recording that won a Grammy.
Mm-hmm.
I called, when I was going to do Tad's music, I called Face up. I said, and we worked together to come up with these orchestrations and things. But anyway, so we both played the week at the Smiley Dog, and Face played so beautiful, man. He sounded like he had a tone like Bird, right? And he played in that fashion, right? He played with, when Monk would come to Cleveland and use local cats, Face would be playing Gigi Grice's part or Ernie Henry's part. He was, when you speak, you could speak with Frank Foster or Ben Golson. Those all know Face. Jimmy Heath, they all knew him, man. And when I told Jimmy Heath and Benny also that Face wrote these orchestrations for me, right? I remember Benny Golson said, oh, he had a beautiful hand. Because Face he wrote parts, He would just write by hand. He'd write the trumpet part. He'd write no score. I don't have any scores for any of those arrangements for my record with my nonette. He just sent me parts. So I had to study the parts to figure out, and then when I rehearsed, know what was happening, because I didn't have a score to follow. Anyway, Face, so we play the week with MacDuff, and he digs us, and then he leaves for a couple of weeks. Then all of a sudden, we both get called to join the band. That he had all these gigs through the George Wein, the Oregon Summit, okay, on the road with Jimmy Smith's trio, Shirley Scott's trio with Harold Vick and Eddie Gladden on drums, Larry Young with kind of a big fusion-y type group. And he had a bunch of dates throughout the states. One night at Carnegie Hall for the Cool Jazz Festival. And so Face and I, we go to Indianapolis, we join the band. And we're on the road with Macduff for maybe, I don't know, 6 months, 5, 6 months that year, But that and Lonnie both brought me to New York to play.
Amazing.
Because with Lonnie, I did my first record date. We came to New York, and then we played gigs around the city.
Yeah.
And with Macduff, we played the Club Baron in Harlem for 2 weeks, and a date at Carnegie Hall for the festival. So while we're in New York, I'm going around town. I'm going to hear all kinds of people. I'm there when Dexter plays at the Vanguard for his homecoming, So I go hear Dexter. I'm like, this is before I really moved to New York, because I was on the road with those cats, And I went down. Rashid Ali had a club called Ali's Alley. Ali's Alley.
Oh, yes.
Down on Green Street. And it wasn't really a club with liquor, it was more of a loft, listening space. I went down and dug Rashid, man, and Albert Daly was playing piano. I had sat in with Albert. I ended up sitting in and playing with Rashid and meeting him.
Wow.
Rashid Ali, man. I was listening to Interstellar Space and all this music with Coltrane,
Right.
And so this is 1975, 76, those years, right? And sat in with Chet Baker.
Wow.
And was just going around. Sam Rivers had a place called Studio Rivby on Bond Street. I went and heard Sam play with Dave Holland and Barry Ashel, and heard Anthony Braxton. And
wow.
So New York was the destination, right?
That's incredible.
So after being on the road with Lonnie and Jack those couple of years, I moved to New York in 76.
Yeah.
But those cats really brought me to town, and it's like,
that's beautiful, Joe. I was also going to ask you, man, in that other trio that you had that was led by drummer, the late Paul Motion, man, that was also a good group. I really enjoyed the stuff that you guys did. Yeah.
Thank you, man. Bill and I played with Paul from 1981 till he passed in 2011.
Yeah. You and Bill Frisell go back. Man, you guys have been playing together for a while. You guys have this long history together. Bill's great. Yeah.
Well, he's like such an expressive, personal, beautiful musician and improviser, and so creative and so free that he can sit in any kind of setting. He could really be expressive with his voice in any kind of music.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of player I've always tried to strive to be.
Yeah.
And Bill and I went back to Berkeley, but then he moved to Europe. He went to Europe and was living in Belgium and came back to New York in the early 80s. Right around the time Paul was going to form a new group.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we both started to play with him, 1981, And that relationship and formation of the trio, and also some quintet settings with Jim Pepper on tenor and Billy Drews on tenor and alto, with Ed Schuler on bass, Mark Johnson on bass at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
Created a lot of music, and Paul was writing all kinds of things. And both Bill and I first heard Paul in the early 70s too. Bill, I think, might have heard Charles Lloyd, and Paul was playing with Charles.
Yeah.
I heard the Keith Jarrett Quartet with Charlie Hayden and Dewey Redman and Paul.
Yeah.
1972, something like that, around that time. And man, that was some music, man, and a quartet sound that was so personal, that really got to me, and those are the cats I really focused on.
Mm-hmm.
And, that direction of playing, Dewey's beautiful expression and tone and sound, was something else, man. I ended up playing with Charlie Hayden Liberation Music Orchestra then with Dewey. And, but playing with Paul it came from being in the room with those cats, man. And then just being on the scene, and things just kind of happen,
One of the things, Joe, that I also like about your career, we talk about Berkeley. You're also an educator, and I know that you used to teach at Berkeley. One of the most amazing things is getting that honorary doctorate, man, from Berkeley. That's beautiful.
Well, that, like first I think I got a alumni achievement. I got an achievement award.
Yeah.
And then an honorary doctorate. And now I hold the Gary Burton Chair in Jazz Performance, which I work together with Danilo Perez, John Patitucci, and Terry Lynn Carrington, and George Garzone, and a few other folks in the Global Jazz Institute within Berkeley, right? And that's been such a pleasure, man, and an incredible learning experience. Because you're basically, I treat it like I'm sharing the blessings with everybody and trying to inspire people to dig deep into who they are, what's your blood, man. Where are you coming from?
Right.
And then of course studying the masters and living in the library of the sounds and spirits. I have a lot of different approaches about how to translate my inspiration to others, and that came from playing with Woody Herman's band at the beginning, man. First time I had to address a class was with Woody, in 76, when I moved to New York, I got the gig with the Woody Herman band. It was during his 40th anniversary period.
Yeah.
So I had known and played with this great saxophone player, Joe Lovano, who was from Rochester. And he was in Woody's band with Sal Nestico in the 60s. He got called to play this 40th anniversary period with Woody, which he didn't really want to go back on the road and do that.
Yeah.
He was in New York. We got friendly and we played a session together with Albert Daly, and I gave him my number where I was staying. All of a sudden I get a call one day from Woody Herman, the road manager, saying that Joe Romano recommended me. And would I have eyes to come out and fly to St. Louis and join the band? But it was like kind of, your first gig is your audition.
Yeah.
Really, there's no rehearsal. Woody didn't know who I was, and nobody knew it. Those cats didn't really know. But Joe Romano, he said, call this young man. Okay, so 23 at the time. I fly to St. Louis. First gig's in a parking lot. The wind is blowing. The music's going like, I'm trying to figure out the parts, and I knew the tune Four Brothers. I knew Early Autumn. I knew Apple Honey. I knew some of the tunes because I listened to Woody's records growing up, so I knew some of the music, and I had played some of those things. My dad was playing Early Autumn and those tunes, he taught me those things. So I had an idea of what was happening. I didn't just have to sight read, There was Woody had a big hit on the tune called Caledonia. Okay. I don't know, in the 40s or whenever it was, which had, there was a moment in the solo that Sal Nestico, great saxophone player from Syracuse, one of the really great players, that came through Woody's band in the 60s. I was in the same chair that he had. And there was he played real quick. He could get around his horn, right? Sal. Johnny Griffinish, I mean, Sal played with Basie. He played with a bunch of great bands too, but he was the famous soloist with Woody and established this stop time chorus thing on Caledonia. So the tempo is really fast, right? It's a real bright blues. And Woody would cut the band off and Sal would play and then bring the band back in. Okay. An unaccompanied moment. So we played Caledonia that my first set, and I knew this was going to happen, right? So I was laying for it. We get to that moment. Woody cuts the band off. I played about 5 unaccompanied choruses in tempo.
Yeah.
And brought the rhythm section back in. And from that moment on, the gig was mine. Woody didn't care if you could read the parts and all that. You'll learn the music. He wanted to hear people play.
Yeah.
You know? And that Woody was that kind of leader. And that's why he always attracted some great improvisers throughout his whole career. You know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it just turns out now that in November is the 40th anniversary of Woody becoming a leader and really establishing his band.
Mm-hmm.
So 1936, I guess it would have been. The same night, he plays opposite Count Basie Band at Roseland Ballroom.
Yeah.
So both bands kind of emerged as the two new focus bands in the swing era, right? Under the Ellington Band, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and other bands too. But Woody and Basie kind of at the same time emerged in New York, right? At that. So anyway, the concert that at Carnegie Hall that we did was recorded for RCA. It had Jimmy Giuffre, who wrote Four Brothers. You know, it had Al Cohn and Zoot Sims and Flip Phillips and Stan Getz, the Condoli brothers, all the stars that were around.
Mm-hmm.
They played all the solos and we played all the parts. Okay, so all of a sudden I find myself playing my part on Early Autumn with Stan Getz playing lead.
Mm.
Okay, and a lot of magical moments happened that night. I was featured on a few tunes that the band played without the all-stars, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And all of a sudden, man, like speaking like I was before about, you know, I was in the audience. Now all of a sudden, some of these cats are in my audience. So it makes you play with a certain reverence and I don't know. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
of course you're nervous. I'm nervous. I'm 23 years old,
Right.
but I knew my horn at that level, at that point. I had a lot of confidence about the music and the beat and feeling what was happening, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big springboard for me, man. That night, but just having the gig with Woody, and I stayed on the band for 2.5 years at that point, from that moment.
Incredible.
You know?
Incredible.
Yeah, in the late 70s.
I'm going to ask you, Joe, when you're at home just relaxing, of course, you know, no one is touring right now because of COVID. What are you listening to? What does Joe Lovano listen to when he's just home with his wife, relaxing? You guys have music on. I'm curious what Joe Lovano's listening to.
Well, you know what, man? This whole year, I started like going to my record collection, right?
Yeah.
My LP collection, and just randomly picking an LP from my library. All right. So I don't know how many LPs I have, you know, in the hundreds, I guess. I don't know. So I've been listening to all kinds of music from the library that was some of my dad's records and the library that I've collected through the years.
Yeah.
On LPs. So I pulled out like some beautiful, incredible things, man, of Eric Dolphy and Hooker Little and Max Roach's band and some Coltrane and Charlie Parker and a Lester Young record and Andrew Hill. You know, I mean, every time, because I'm not looking for anything. You know, a lot of times you go to your records, you'd start to look for something. This was the first time I've been just going and not looking for anything and just randomly pulling an LP, you know. Pulled a Paul Bley Footloose the other day that I hadn't listened to in years, man. And it was so beautiful to listen to Paul Bley,
Yeah.
You know, and Gary Peacock and Pete LaRocca, you know, that trio that they had, you know. I pulled an Old and New Dreams record with Dewey and Don Cherry and Blackwell and Charlie, you know.
Yeah. Stuff.
So I've been doing that a lot of different things, and some recent Keith Jarrett solo recordings. Since I've been recording for ECM, they sent me some recent stuff that came out, and some beautiful, incredible Keith Jarrett
The
solo
Cole concert is the one that everyone knows, you know,
of course. But you know what? Facing You was the
facing you.
first solo recording, I think, for Keith, and it was an early ECM record, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Clone Concert and others during that period. But like over the last probably 10 years, there's a bunch of new solo recordings that are so beautiful, incredible, like Stream of Consciousness playing, you know, like which is sending me into excuse me, into the woodshed, and the idea about the spontaneous creation in music, you know, to develop harmonic sequences as you're playing from a simple theme, you know, from 2 and 3 notes, you know, and try to develop, like channeling things, you know. So I've been practicing and playing and trying to develop a way of playing from within my inspired life, you know, and it's been really beautiful, man. It's been really slowing me down into really vibrating on tonalities and playing in a real spiritual kind of a way, you know, and it's also leading me into composing in a different way. Instead of trying to write a tune, I'm just writing phrases and ideas, maybe with no bar lines and no stems on the notes, like sequences of tonalities. And every time I walk and play through them, they have a different shape in the rhythm and in the range of my instrument. And it's been a really beautiful period of study, you know? And some of the compositions that are on my new Trio Tapestry recordings for ECM are coming from this idea, right? And
And the
it's
other thing,
also coming from working with Gunther Schuller, you know,
yeah,
and knowing Gunther through the years and working with him on my Rush Hour release and other projects with Gunther, and just studying with him as far as the 12-tone concepts and
I
ideas.
mean, you have so much music. It's incredible. I think you've released what, 40 recordings or something like that? 40
Well,
plus?
you know, I haven't really counted them up, but I know I did maybe 25 for Blue Note alone.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
I had 3 consecutive 7-record deals
Yeah.
in the early 90s. And then I did some extra projects within that period also, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And Bruce Lundvall was so beautiful, man, to work with.
Yeah.
And once I produced and did a few things like Rush Hour with Gunther, I had a green light. I would give him ideas about things, and he would be curious how I would pull it off, I think. And then he would give me, okay, yeah, let's do it. You know.
I was talking to Cassandra Wilson about him too. She was saying,
Oh yeah,
some very, very positive, good stuff to say about Bruce. And
beautiful.
like
Yeah, Cassandra was there when I first joined Blue Note through Schofield in late
Mhm.
80s into 1990. Diane Reeves and Cassandra.
Yeah.
We played together one time for one of Bruce's birthday parties.
Yeah.
That was really special.
Great, great artist. Have you ever worked with, I was just thinking about some artists that I don't know if you've worked with. Have you ever worked with Pat Metheny before?
You know, never officially. I've known Pat because he was also at Berkeley during that period in the 70s.
Mike Stern is a student of his.
Yeah, Mike was there, you know, and Bill. Pat was the one who he told Paul played with Pat when that record 8081 came out.
Jack DeJohnette and those guys, yeah.
Right. There was some gigs that Jack couldn't make that Paul played, and with Dewey, and Paul wanted to form a band, and he asked Pat if he knew about some guitar player, and Pat recommended Bill at the time. But I've sat in and played with Pat a handful of times. Yeah, incredible. One time in Spain, he had a group with Roy Haynes and Christian
Oh
and
yeah,
Josh.
Joshua
And
Redmond. Yeah.
yeah, and we were on the gig. Schofield and I played the first set, and they played the second set. And Pat invited us to play with them. So somewhere there's some recording of John and Pat and Josh and I and Christian and Roy Haynes. So I remember that was a nice moment, you know.
Yeah, incredible.
Something that just happens when you're on the road, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Another musician I was thinking I would love to hear you do something with is John McLaughlin, the guitarist. You know,
Pretty phenomenal musician, man. It's so
yeah.
inspiring. Well, he's inspired. So when you're inspired, you're inspiring to everybody around you.
Yeah, without question.
Know? Oh yeah, man. You know, he's something else and has been very influential, man.
Yeah.
He played with Miles.
Oh
when
yeah.
I first heard Miles the first time live was when that record Live Evil came out.
Live Evil. Yeah, that's a great great recording.
Now the gig in Boston that I heard, McLaughlin wasn't on, but it was with Keith Jarrett and Jack and Gary Bartz, Michael Henderson on electric.
Oh yeah.
And Don Elias on
the late Don Elias. Yeah.
You know, I mean, hearing Miles that first time in a room was amazing, especially at that period and that band, because they played real free, man.
Oh yeah.
You know, there was a couple little themes. There was some themes that they would touch, but then it were all the themes were vehicles to go and take it somewhere, you know.
Joe, did you get a chance to see the great quintet, you know, with Herbie, Ron Carter, and Tony with Miles? Did you ever see that band live?
No. Yeah. I never did. That period, I was a teenager. I was 14 when Coltrane passed in 67.
67, yeah. Incredible.
So I never heard that band live. Yeah.
Are you into the avant-garde like Cecil Taylor, Albert Ayler? You like that stuff?
Well, you know, Albert was from Cleveland.
Yeah.
And so I got into Albert through Coltrane, you know, through the Meditations record and Ascension and Om. And some of those recordings of Coltrane brought me into that. And also there was one that had Cecil Taylor on it with Coltrane. Coltrane Time, maybe it was with
something
Kenny
like that. I think I know what you're talking about. I have
Kenny
that recording.
It originally was a Kenny Dorham session, but it's with Louis Hayes and the bass was
escapes me at the moment here.
No, I know. He played with Bill Evans after Scott LaFaro passed. Also,
it's not Eddie Gomez, is it?
No, before Eddie. Before Eddie. It'll come.
It'll probably come after we get finished.
But anyway, Cecil Taylor's Chuck Israels. There
it is. Yeah.
He's on bass with Cecil Taylor, Kenny Dorham, and Coltrane, and they play Just Friends. They play some tunes, and Cecil is Cecil Taylor, but he's playing inside these tunes too, you know. And then he had a record also that maybe it was called Air, that Archie Shepp played on. And I got into Cecil there, and then Unit Structures. I started to follow Cecil, and then through the years in New York, he would come around to hear the trio with Paul all the time. Yeah. He was always at the Vanguard when we would play. And I never had a chance to play with Cecil, but I heard him a lot, man. A lot of solo gigs. And then once with Jimmy Lyons.
Yeah.
In San Francisco with Shannon Jackson.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But one thing I want to mention, one of my really proud moments was playing with Abby Lincoln. And getting called to play a session with her maybe third to the last session. I don't know if you've heard, it's called Over the Years.
No, but I'm going to listen to it.
It's on Verve, right?
Okay.
One of her last, maybe the third to the last session she did.
Yeah.
And man, Abby Lincoln.
Yeah.
Just an amazing musician and person, man. I loved her, man. And when she called me for this date, I didn't even know she knew who I was, you know. And she called me and I made the session and she was in her booth. I was in a booth also. The rhythm section was kind of in the room, the main room. And we played this tune, Windmills of Your Mind, right? Michel Legrand.
Yeah.
And it was this amazing swirling dervish of an arrangement and a piece. And she wanted me to play, you know, with her. And I didn't want to step on her toes, you know. I was like, you know, and she's doing this to me while she's singing, she's motioning me like, play more, man, you know. So she gave me a green light to play, man. And this one take that we did on that tune, I'm like, when I listen to that now and reflect on the date, man, that was a beautiful, beautiful embrace with Abby. She, man, she really told a story, and in her, the rest, most of all the other tunes on the record are her tunes.
Yeah.
Her lyrics and her composition. But that tune, and she told me later she sent the recording to Michel Legrand and he really dug it.
Oh,
that was something too. That was funny, man.
that's incredible. You know, man, you need to write a book. You have so many
Well,
amazing stories, Joe. I'm loving this. And the people, when they watch this interview, they're going to love it too. I mean, because that's what I want. You know, when I interview great musicians like yourself, man, just tell your story, you know, and these stories just are just amazing. I mean,
well, I really appreciate what you're doing, man. And thanks again for inviting me to share some of these things.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You're a class act. Love you, man. And look forward to seeing you again once, you know, this COVID thing lifts, or at least it's over. Hang on, I'm about to close out the show. Well, you've heard it from the great Joe Lovano. And as the saying goes, if the music grooves and makes you move, it must be jazz. I'm Preston Williams with Jazz Talk signing off. Peace.
Thank you.